So now it's time for panel session 4 that'll discuss using collaboration to develop a Massachusetts roadmap and drive advanced air mobility innovation. So Paige Scott Reed, partner at for the Unmanned and Autonomous Systems practice at Prince Labelle, will be moderating the session. Now, her bio is on the website. She's worked as a general counsel for MassDOT and MBTA, but interestingly, she was also the general counsel to the Boston 2024 Olympics bid. So she knows a little bit about high-flying industries in the making, I think, right? So Paige, if you're ready, we can go over to you.
Fantastic. Just let me share my screen here. Great. So we're thrilled to have a great panel today to look specifically at how to collaborate in Massachusetts with the goal of building a roadmap and really accelerating specifically advanced air mobility here in Massachusetts. We'll start out with two faces that are probably familiar. Dr. Jeffrey DiCarlo, who is the Massachusetts Aeronautics Administrator, a key leader in AUVSINE New England, and just a tireless advocate for aviation in Massachusetts. And he'll talk with Joseph Donovan, who is Managing Director of Federal Strategies at Nelson Mullins Riley and Scarborough. Joe is a government relations strategist and a registered lobbyist who has been instrumental in helping the MassDOT drone team and Dr. DiCarlo really launch some next generation aviation initiatives in Massachusetts. So we'll get to hear about those too. So Dr. DiCarlo, if you're ready, we'll start with you.
Sounds great, Paige. Let me get my presentation up. Okay, I hope everybody can see this. Give me a thumbs up, Paige, if we're ready to go. Sounds great. Okay, so again, just to, I'll touch on some slides here, and I'll just cut to the chase a little bit here in that what's Massachusetts' role in advanced air mobility development? Make no mistake here. We're going to facilitate, we're going to convene, we're going to develop or co-develop, and we're going to deploy or co-deploy. That's what the goal is. We want to accelerate the advancement of the state of the art. Let there be no doubt. I love what Peter Boynton said in the previous panel about really these pairs, right, that we're actually using in these sessions are truly teams. And there's multiple teams. And I got to say, you know, an essential team is my co-presenter, Joe Donovan. And you'll be able to see exactly how he can help me with ensuring that me and our team and the state can advance the state of the art. So this slide right here, a lot of you have seen this before, and a lot of you are very familiar with this urban air mobility and advanced air mobility. And you know, really when this rolled out and we were thinking of Uber in the air and all of that, we were really thinking about those urban environments. And you know, with Davis's presentation earlier, I actually learned a lot from Davis and the way they're thinking about things, you know, and certainly about a year and a half ago, I first heard the term rural air mobility. And I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit confusing. And so here we are, we got this new term called advanced air mobility. And in the call out box down below, you can see that, you know, it incorporates use cases not specific to operations in urban environments, commercial intercity, you know, the thin haul, and cargo delivery. And Davis really touched on the cargo delivery piece, as well as even using small UAS to do that last mile delivery. I will say this, I never expected 3 years ago that we would be kicking off an advanced air mobility effort before some of the other efforts. I mean, we're working concurrently in a lot of different areas that I'm going to mention here, but advanced air mobility is going to be one of the first industry, academia, and government collaborations via an integration task force that we're going to kick off. And it's because the World Economic Forum, NASA, the FAA, and really major drivers, United States Air Force. We heard from Nate Diller, Colonel Nate Diller yesterday. The United States Air Force Agility Prime effort is really driving the fight. And what they're doing is they are assisting small companies, medium companies, large companies with assistance, especially through what the military calls airworthiness, but we call generally in the commercial side the certification process of new systems. So really, really excited about this big push going on. In addition, I have a demand signal because in my oversight of 35 airports in Massachusetts, there are folks like Jeff Douglas from Marshfield Airport and Shoreline Aviation that's actually said, hey, we need to get going here. I'm worried if the infrastructure is going to be ready. But let's talk about the 4 pillars that we're really focused on within the Commonwealth. I'll put advanced air mobility here first. We just talked about that. Now I have to think about it a little bit differently. You know, the small UAS moving goods, maybe that last mile, but certainly it is. It's the movement of goods and passengers, and it will reduce congestion on our roads. It's going to change the way society operates. And I think if we do it correctly, it's going to be for the better. Enabling UAS, a term coined by DHS, in the way they look at it, we look at it as, you know, leveraging our capabilities for inspection, asset management, incident response, and emergency management. But certainly we're driving towards beyond visual line of sight operations, right? And I was kind of lumping small package delivery into the enabling UAS side. I'm not doing that. We're moving it over to advanced air mobility in an integrated way. And that's the way we're thinking about it. On the counter-UAS side, the FAA likes to describe this as airspace domain awareness. And certainly with our counter-UAS working group, we're really working hard to really understand what's going on with the clueless, the careless, and potentially the criminal. We want to understand that through airspace domain awareness. And we're doing a lot to that end. On the test and training facilities, we're not building a build it and they will come type of operation. We're working with partners like the FAA, like DOD, the United States Air Force, Hanscom, Force Protection Group, to actually build facilities that can allow us to operationalize solutions. And we're doing that in a big way. There's a big umbrella that I don't have depicted on that, and that's data. So we're actually looking at data holistically. Our initial foray into the data piece was the data that we collect doing inspections that we need to use and consider for communications with respect to incidents and emergency response. But now we need to really think about, you know, the air traffic management, unmanned traffic management data piece, the vehicle data in the integrated piece that Ralph talked a lot about. So those are the kinds of things that we need to think about. You know, now's really the time, right, to take advantage, for Massachusetts to take advantage of this nexus of innovation. The time is right. We're working with Raytheon. We're working with Draper. General Dynamics is hugely interested in what's going on here with respect to our domain of air and applying that into the maritime and underwater environment. GE Aeros, we are under contract with MITRE and Volpe, and we'll be under contract with Lincoln shortly to actually work on all 4 pillars. And then, of course, MassAutonomy, we will, as a state, and are working with MassAutonomy. And a lot of the work that we're going to be doing will be with MassAutonomy and our other partners that are going to work with and through MassAutonomy on some really interesting things. And of course, we've got Mass Robotics. It's a great partner and in everything that we do. Along the bottom panel, I got to say, one of the value adds that we have here is our ability to leverage the DoD in the form of the Air Force and the Army. Right now, we're working heavily with the Air Force at the Hanscom Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. And every program will have to be handled for the Air Force out of Hanscom. And we look forward to working with them on and into the future, and currently are. We're working on both counter small UAS as well as GBDA STARS, ground-based detect and avoid STARS program that, of course, Raytheon's involved with, MITRE, and the Defense Innovation Unit, outstanding group. We're working with them. AFWorks, that leads Agility Prime, as you heard yesterday, and of course the TechStars for startups. Fantastic program, getting folks involved in the SBIR program. And you can see on the map, you know, we're talking about from the Berkshires in the west all the way out to the Cape and Islands. We have a lot of stuff going on. I mean, there's some major efforts, and there's a lot more that we could talk about, but everything that we can leverage in this particular ecosystem, we're looking forward to leveraging in the future, in the near future. We do really, truly have a graduated system of test ranges. And these are not test ranges that necessarily the state owns. We've been a practical lead for the FAA UAS test site initiative. That's a partnership with New Air in New York. Wasim and I are, and Frank Cerna, who you'll hear from shortly, we're all on the board of directors for that entity. And now with MassAutonomy is going to take that lead. But we've been the practical lead as a state, and we're going to be handing that off to MassAutonomy. And the great work we do with the mission commanders at Joint Base Cape Cod for the UAS test range initiatives are going to be expanded, as well as at Devens, because again, we have a demand signal that there's a real interest in the old Fort Devens and the deactivated Moore Army Airfield, which is you know, just a fantastic facility. I really look at, you know, the Boston Autonomous Vehicle Testing Area is a great proving ground that we can work across domains close into the city. Costas, you know, you heard it. I mean, it's just a fantastic add to our ecosystem. UMass Amherst, there's so much going on there. Top radar shop, one of the top radar shops in the whole nation, right, that we're working with. And at Westover, they're building a simulation system for air traffic management that we are going to adapt for UTM and a lot of the other kinds of things that we want to do. Well, why are we doing this? I mean, from the standpoint of DOT, I actually have, in the DOT, I have, we'll call them paying customers, and we're operationalizing corridors. So you can see in blue there an enabling UAS. We have corridors starting down in the bottom right there, though that's across the rail line. You can see a bunch of other corridors up towards Boston that come out like a spider in blue. Those are rail lines. We're flying those right now, but we want to operationalize them through beyond visual line of sight in UTM. And we actually have Counter-UAS, airspace domain awareness, that we are you know, trying to integrate to the max extent possible, and that's shown in red. And out to the west, we actually have an interstate corridor on I-90 that we applied for during the integration pilot program with the FAA. And then you can see, obviously, the test and evaluation ranges. The big thing with a lot of what we're trying to do is we have to have partners that have a need and come to me, come to the state and say, look, we're really interested in this particular area. I was really excited to hear from Jeff Douglas from Marshfield. There are other organizations and individuals that have reached out that I can't mention right now, but it's a sizable amount of interest in this particular area. Some of the players on the, you know, that are pictured on the left side of the screen, including Beta, Jaunt, Lilium. We've been in, you know, constant contact with them for a period of 2 years plus in the case of Lilium. And, you know, and then of course we've had conversations with Joby. A big part of this is that we really need to think about the public process and the community integration piece. And so to that end, the World Economic Forum, we're part of their Los Angeles-based urban air mobility effort, and they've come up with the 7 guiding principles, if you will. Safety, sustainability, and low noise are key. And if we, if we could have really spoken to those maybe more effectively for the downtown heliport effort, Paige and I and the Commonwealth may have been more successful quicker. On the right side, the equity of access is key to what we're trying to do, multimodal connectivity, purpose-driven data sharing. And then really one of our focuses is the next generation aviation workforce. And so local workforce development will be a key piece of what we do. Thanks so much. Joe, I'll hand it off over to you, and I'm going to move back here so Joe can speak with a map and describe how he is really an essential partner and team member.
Thanks, Jeff. Obviously, as everyone sees, there's an awful lot going on. And I also want to just recognize Paige's efforts again at Prince Lobel. We're also a part of this ecosystem, and the ability to have her practice that's obviously dedicated to unmanned and autonomous systems, all that expertise, it's here for us. That's very important and significant to have for the Commonwealth. So thanks, Paige. So as I mentioned, my role is in dealing with a lot of the stakeholders on the state government side, federal government side. The politics matter, and really the key is advocacy. UAS, counter-UAS, advanced air mobility will continue to be growth sectors here in Massachusetts and elsewhere. We've got a terrific story to tell when we talk about our capabilities that we've been learning about the last 2 days, the growth plans, and the ability, as Jeff just outlined, gave some examples, to meet the public needs. But we have to tell that story. The state and federal government each have a role to play in developing the AAM roadmap. At the state level, the Massachusetts Military Asset and Security Strategy Task Force has identified autonomy and AI as some of their key priorities. The task force last briefed Governor Baker in December of last year, and they're ready to move on a number of areas, including autonomy and AI under consideration. And the task force, for those that don't know, is made up of and takes input from government, academia, our military bases, and industry representatives. The task force was actually set up in 2012 to protect and expand missions, jobs, and economic investments at and surrounding Massachusetts military installations. And the reason I mention that is, as you look at that map, you see a number of those key installations here in the Commonwealth. Many of you probably know, I think he may still be on, John Beatty. He's the executive director for the task force. And he's been tremendous in terms of engaging and listening to stakeholders that are involved in advanced air mobility, UAS, counter-UAS. John's former military, he knows this and takes to heart what we're all talking about. The Massachusetts Technology Collaborative, we've heard, they're also front and center at this effort to create that roadmap. And they're supporting Mass Robotics and their effort to gather information on different companies that are currently or plan to be evaluating and testing robotics-related solutions within the Commonwealth. Now, at the federal level, the Massachusetts Congressional Delegation has been made aware of efforts to advance UAS and counter-UAS development in the Commonwealth. In fact, Jeff has briefed several times the entire congressional delegation, both here in Massachusetts and in Washington. And our delegation sits on key committees. And in Massachusetts, we've got 3 members that sit on armed services. Senator Warren on Senate Armed Services, and then Congressman Bill Keating and Seth Moulton. And they, in particular, are uniquely poised to support our collective efforts. Congressman Keating, for example, he helped secure the approvals needed to make Joint Base Cape Cod, so right on your map, an FAA-approved drone test site partnered in with Rome, New York. And Jeff has also spoken about that. There's many of you may be aware, if you're not aware, there's a Congressional Unmanned Systems Caucus. Congressman Keating is on it. Our military bases are currently being used for tests and demonstrations. You've heard that in the last couple of days. And this is one area where I believe we can see more opportunities for government, academia, and industry to work and collaborate. Now, just this past Monday, so January 11th, the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Gilday, announced that a plan focused on developing unmanned systems, air, ground, and undersea for the Navy is going to be released in the coming weeks. So that's just in the Navy. So when we talk about opportunities for many of the companies, the universities that have been part of this and very involved with AUVSINE New England, that's where the rubber meets the road. We have an incoming administration, the Biden administration. Our delegation has excellent relationships with the incoming Biden administration. We have some recent Biden administration nominees. Boston Mayor Marty Walsh is slated to become Secretary of Labor. Just to our south a bit, Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo is slated to become Secretary for Commerce. And I would add that they can be very, very helpful in understanding the value of what we want to do here in Massachusetts. So strategically, our efforts will be more effective if we can communicate with consistent messages that highlight how UAS, Counter-UAS, and AAM can grow and prosper here in Massachusetts. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you both. We do have a few minutes for some questions. If anybody wants to send questions directly to me, I'll see those in the chat. But in the meantime, I wanted to ask of my own, you've both mentioned demand signals. What role do demand signals play in shaping your efforts, and more importantly, in freeing up the ability on your part on behalf of the state to invest in novel technologies? There's something of a chicken and the egg problem here. So what role do demand signals play?
Yeah, the demand signals, and I can start first, Joe, but Rich Davies is going to be on, former Secretary of Transportation. The boss, the governor, they want to know what industry is clamoring for and what's real, right? And you hear Wasim talk about this all the time. Is the market there? And it really actually, demand signals are key, right? Because you know better what direction to go. It de-risks everything a lot more, because if industry is coming out and saying, hey, we need to really move on this, we're investing in this, wow. Okay, the state's going to say, look, this makes sense for us. And so it's really key to me. And the boss, Secretary Pollock, has been fantastic. She asked me, so what's industry saying? What's industry saying? What's the state of the art? Is this real?
Fantastic. You've talked about lots of different possibilities. I'm wondering where you see yourself gaining the greatest traction in Massachusetts in terms of freeing up additional government resources to invest in really pushing this ecosystem forward.
Joe, you want to take that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll add, it really comes down to advocacy. And another element that goes to the question you just asked, Paige, competition. And Jeff can certainly speak to the states that we're competing with for this industry sector. It will be hand-to-hand combat, and it will be high stakes. Again, with the companies that are on board, like Raytheon, universities like UMass. This is highly, highly competitive, and states are already making very big bets. They're making large investments. There are very strong collaborations with industry, military installations, academia in many other states. But maybe I let Jeff add to that. That's what's also going to drive this competition. We could lose this too. We have a tremendous ecosystem. Massachusetts is a hotbed and home of innovation. We can't lose this.
Yeah, and the only thing is, and so losing it, and I know one of our esteemed colleagues from Mass Robotics, Tom Ryden, told me a long time, we kind of lost autonomous vehicles to Silicon Valley. And so I'm fighting every day to ensure this industry actually is able to reside here as a leader, right? And so it's a fight. It definitely is a fight the whole time. I will say though, there is collaboration among states for various things, but we are competing.
And what do you think helps, or what would be most helpful to you in terms of trying to pull together the various strands that you've spoken about today? What can industry do? What can academia do to help you help them?
Yeah. So what I need is for this particular ecosystem for Massachusetts, I really need to understand the basic facts. Let's talk advanced air mobility because that's really what we're looking at right now. I need to really understand in Massachusetts, what are the barriers? What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? What are the political, economic, social, technological? What are the legal issues? I need to know those things. Okay, I need to know what that market looks like. And then I really do truly need a roadmap. And if I have that roadmap, and it's a collaboratively constructed roadmap with industry and academia and government, it will go a long way for us.
Jeff said it best.
That's fantastic. I'm really interested in where you think this roadmap will come from, right? Is that something that you're already have some sense in mind of where to start and what comes next? Or is that something where you're looking for input?
Yeah, so both. Okay, so we do have a sense. We have a plan, we have a strategy, and we're going to be, we're in the process of executing the tactic. And that's by partnering with MassAutonomy, an industry-created nonprofit that's going to bring together those industry, academia, government funders, as well as developers, right, to actually lay out those kinds of things. With that, we are looking at really focused integration task forces that you're going to hear about a little bit more in the future. And we think, and you'll hear about how one industry partner has agreed to assist us through MassAutonomy to lay out those basic facts and market study that's really focused, as well as that roadmap. So we have a pretty good idea, but do you want me to give away everything right now, Paige?
I was going to say, if I let you keep talking, you'll give away all of the secrets of the next panelist. So I'm going to cut you off.
Okay.
We'll move, if you don't mind, to the next set. We're thrilled to have with us two additional panelists who are going to bring a very different perspective, speaking from the industry perspective, looking at the same goal of creating a roadmap for Massachusetts and really supporting further investment in AAM. Frank Cerna, the Principal Director of Strategic Initiatives at Draper, is with us. He's a founder and former president and just a key member of AUVSINE New England, and we couldn't have put on this conference without him, so I'm thrilled that he's taken the additional time to agree to be a panelist. And Billy Thalheimer, who is, I apologize if I've mispronounced your name, I'm not very good. He's an aerospace business leader and a multidisciplinary engineer. He's led execution and business development for next generation aircraft for Aurora Flight Sciences. And he's also led flight physics modeling for Boeing's electric air taxi. So he brings a lot of up close experience. He's also, out on his own now, providing advice and consulting. And so he brings a real breadth of perspectives. Thrilled to have both of you. And with that, maybe I'll toss it to Frank to tell us your view of how this looks from the industry's perspective.
Hey, Frank, you're muted. Hey, Frank.
Okay, now I'm on. I got it. Thank you. Little technical issue there. And here I am going to talk about advanced air mobility. So real quick, Billy and I are going to touch on a set of topics, basically a half dozen topics, really different areas that are essential for industry to be attracted into this domain, to invest and build, and with a particular focus on what can we do locally in Massachusetts to attract more of the essential operations and businesses that would generate this. And bear in mind, there's also another set of categories to keep in perspective, which is we really have the developers of the technology, the airframes, the avionics, the AI software, the operators, and you saw some of those great photos in Jeff's slides. So those operators will operate these air taxi services, these delivery services, and then finally the customer users. And so all three need to be addressed in terms of infrastructure so they can ultimately use those services successfully and the providers can provide the right capabilities and systems. And so real quick on the half dozen areas we're going to touch on, I'll touch on a few and then Billy will pick that up. You know, the first is standard setting and testing. So we saw test ranges on the map, but we also need a level of testing to test the software and the avionics. And think their analogy to what underwriters' laboratories are to electrical devices. And there's actually a history in aviation. Air Radio Incorporated, was something set up nearly 100 years ago to actually coordinate all the use of radio frequencies through a nonprofit actually run by the airlines at the time. And so that it all doesn't have to fall back to the FAA, but the industry could do more. So we got to think about what are we going to do locally in those areas to ensure we have standards and testing capabilities so that developers and operators can move forward. Second one is data and data sharing, data management, and real-time awareness. And all we have to do is look at the Uber example. So what are we going to do locally to provide that kind of capability? And there may, in fact, be an Uber for advanced air mobility that drops in and takes over the industry. But we have to look at local capabilities so we can nurture our local firms that will serve this industry. On a related note, and Paige can jump in and talk more later, there has to be also some legal framework to help this come along. And I would just suggest maybe it's something that looks analogous to flood insurance. So that the firms entering this business get some support, some insurance from a broader entity, for example, the Commonwealth, so they can enter in this and not have to have the burden, the financial and some of the other burdens associated with trying to insure themselves to enter such a new and emerging industry. And then three others Billy will talk about are any local subsidies, assuring the industries will actually place themselves here, also market incentives, and then helping the market form. And in many of these cases, I would offer up that we should look to some, the model of a consortium. Often it's a nonprofit consortium. I mentioned Air. Another model is in another not quite related area, but some similar issues. There's an entity called the Maritime Spill Corporation. All the oil companies run that nonprofit to deal with maritime incidents. And particular function they have is also to protect the sensitivity of data, along the coastline. So we need data sharing here, to ensure that we can operate efficiently across a set of users and a set of operators. And yet some of that data is sensitive, then we ought to look to a local industry.
Frank, I can't hear you any longer. Can others still hear Frank?
Nope.
No.
Yeah, I lost him.
Well, you know what? Billy, is there any chance that you can jump in for a few minutes until we can get Frank back?
Absolutely. Well, I can pick up where Frank left off then, I guess. First off, thanks for having me on. Coming from industry, this is pretty near and dear to my heart in terms of what is the industry side really looking for from the various states as they sort of select where they're going to roll out in, and what's sort of the path of least resistance to AAM and putting these new vehicles in the air. And so Frank was covering sort of the standard set. He was covering the data and the awareness, and he was covering the legal aspects. So continuing on there, although I just saw Frank joined, unless he wants to jump back on and finish his thought.
No, go ahead, Billy. I think I'm okay. For some reason, my Zoom dropped out and rebooted. So go right ahead, Billy. You continue.
All right, sounds good. Well, I want to touch then on infrastructure and capabilities, right? In that, companies are looking for states where infrastructure is already set up, and we can go back to, the flight corridors that Jeff was talking about, and that Wasim was talking about yesterday, that the FAA is talking about now in their UAM ConOps sort of V1.0 document that they put out. And, it's important to start envisioning these new airspaces, this new use of airspace, and how we can get vehicles operating in this airspace. But there are clearly some issues with it too, right? We can't just roll out these airspaces, these restricted corridors over crowded cities, because clearly that's a difficult place to do something that is sort of the first of its kind. However, over the cities and over crowded populations are where the markets exist, and these companies want to demonstrate these products, their BLOS technology, their delivery drones, their counter-UAS drones in the markets where these things actually happen. So there needs to be sort of a gradual introduction. I think Jeff was speaking to it well earlier, showing how there are different test ranges in different parts of the state, sort of going into Boston slowly. But we need to make those moves to where their high population density centers are, so that we can satisfy the business case that the companies are looking for. And of course, anytime you think about a new airspace paradigm, such as these restricted corridors, we're also going to have sides that disagree, such as, AOPA raised a valid point that if we start restricting airspace for things like urban air mobility, then actually some of the requirements are going to sort of lock out some other users. They may lock out some of the general aviation pilots, like myself, when I want to do a Boston City tour, may not be able to do it in the same way. And so different pockets are going to sort of need to deal with different competing bodies who want to use this airspace. So as we sort of look at who's leading the infrastructure problem in the US, I think Massachusetts is right in the mix. Going back to sort of where I was looking in industry, some of the states that are making these large infrastructure investments are North Dakota, North Carolina, and Ohio. North Dakota is setting up a statewide network of ground radar, and in collaboration with the Grand Forks base, they're actually making these radar, which are the same ones used to give situational awareness to air traffic control. They're making that same data set available for companies who want to do test flights statewide. And that is an incredibly powerful asset and tool to give companies to say, one of the main difficulties in doing beyond line of sight flight is your detect and avoid. And so now by having this air traffic control class radar and situational awareness, it is a huge help. When we look at North Carolina, multiple small drone companies, it's sort of the small drone delivery capital of the world almost, because you have Volancy, Zipline, you have Walmart with Flytrex, and I think even Amazon Prime Air have all started their delivery network in North Carolina, and it's because they've made the regulatory pathways very clear. So it's not to say that Massachusetts can't do this as well and can't keep up, but these states are sort of leading the way right now in terms of saying we're going to expedite these and we're going to invest in infrastructure and make this available to companies who want to start innovating. Another topic besides the infrastructure is just the incentive structure. And here again, Massachusetts is seeing bordering states offering some pretty serious incentives to bringing new companies in. And some of these new small startup companies are the ones who are innovating at the most rapid pace. And you look at Rhode Island, who's giving innovation vouchers, they're giving tax credits for project costs up in the multiple tens of millions of dollars. They're doing state income tax, reimburse the cash. Vermont similarly is doing large R&D tax credits. Massachusetts has some incentives, but they're not to the same scale here, and they're not as well publicized. And I think actually the the advertisement and the publicity of these programs is just as important as the fact that they exist anyways, especially when we talk about sort of startup companies that are so laser focused on their job. When we look in Massachusetts and sort of the key effort around economic development zones, the focus to date has really been manufacturing in terms of how can we, how can we spur economic development in these key areas of interest. But I think a question going forward is, how do you put AAM on the list, and how do you put urban air mobility on the list as the unlockers to those economic development zones, right? Setting real goals which connects those economic development zones to places that are already economically developed may help the development cycle faster than focusing on, say, manufacturing, right? It's the transfer of people and goods and services, and even expanding living options by enabling commuting options to these economic development zones that may actually have a greater impact and therefore, reflect itself as an incentive to these companies who are innovating and can help unlock that. A couple other ones I want to hit. So one is public perception, which I think Jeff talked about earlier as well. I mean, putting more loud vehicles full of spinning things in the air is going to take public buy-in, no matter which way you look at it. And I think, everyone needs to be involved in that. The companies, the states, the end customers who are going to use these, right? And if you look at recent efforts, like Jeff was saying, I think with the recent sort of heliport and seaplane efforts, public perceptions there is something that clearly needs to be bought in before we can make these new aviation innovations happen. And these can be in the form of flight demonstrations, probably when COVID's over, sort of tech days or tech fairs. I think people need to see the technology, become comfortable with them, listen to them, sit in them, experience them, and that will sort of unlock the buy-in of the public. Finally, and sort of near and dear to my heart in my new role going forward, is expediting small businesses and startups in terms of getting to scale. And that takes real key focus on these kind of companies. And again, I go back to sort of the advertisement of these programs. I mean, even just myself on this call, listening to Joe, I learned about the Massachusetts Technology Collaborative and the programs they have there. And so, ensuring that these informations get out there and that startups know what programs are available to help them get into the state will help them choose where they set up shop and where they develop. I think we need sort of a distributed model of buy-in to this. And I think, for instance, the regulatory, financial, and legal burden all sort of need to be coupled into this to, again, help these companies who are so laser focused on their tech, this sort of one-stop shopping for both incentives and, the pathway, again, that Jeff was talking about. I think MassAutonomy actually has a great plan to do this, and it's fantastic to hear the development there. And they're absolutely right that this is probably one of the biggest competitions going on in aviation right now. Is where are the companies going to pick to do their first test flights, and where are they going to pick to set up shop? And I joked with MassAutonomy before that we have all these .coms trying to commercialize the space, and so we need a .org to organize them. And I think that's what they're doing. But I think really sort of where the rubber meets the road, it's going to be having infrastructure available, having incentives available, and advertised, and creating streamlined pathways for startups to get going. That's going to make Massachusetts successful.
So that's fantastic, and you've given us so many things to think about. I can't help asking one of my own questions first. Massachusetts has a tremendous amount of brain power, has traditionally had lots and lots of startups with great tech, but has not always succeeded in becoming the first place where, to be sort of colloquial about it, real stuff happens, where you get all the way to actual markets. So in looking at that specifically in the context of AAM, if the state is very much motivated to try and have a different outcome here, where would you have them focus? What kinds of investments do you think will pay the largest returns, whether that's in terms of infrastructure or sensing or vehicle technology? Like where would you focus?
Yeah, I think to address sort of all the markets or sort of all the innovation companies, and I'll include, you know, startups and sort of the larger, more established companies, I'd say it's creating these collective groups where everyone has a seat at the table, and, you know, getting the regulators and the state and customers in the room. I think especially that connection to customers is a huge one that the state can do, because again, all the companies are focused on their tech and they're saying, where's the market for this tech, right? We know there's a market out there and I can deliver things faster and safer and cheaper, but who's going to buy my faster delivery vehicle? And so getting the end customers in the room too and facilitating those conversations is a big one. I think if we sort of separate into the startups and the more established companies, I think that the startups are going to be sort of really excited to see these more financial incentives, right? Massachusetts is an expensive place to live and an expensive place to set up shop. And, you know, for some of these startups working on shoestring budgets, I think it's going to be tax incentives, manufacturing incentives, hiring incentives that sort of get them to stay there. For the larger ones with technology already developed, I'd say it's the infrastructure and really the data, right? It's sort of helping them get to the next level of their development. And so if they're, you know, an autonomous delivery company, it's, you know, getting them to beyond visual line of sight operations faster than any other state can. So that's maybe a few ways.
Yeah, and I
So
think
Paige,
I have maybe, sorry. I
Oh, hi,
was going to
Paige.
say
I
I
was
have
just
time
gonna.
for maybe one more question, and I was going to ask you what your thoughts are, Frank, and also trying to press you to bring the broader perspective of AI and machine learning, which I know we have strength in here in Massachusetts. What role do you think that plays in trying to launch this market here?
Right. So to that question, a little bit of the prior one, there's certain activities that are geographically bound in some ways. So if you look at the strength of our software development sector, and that's where AI, machine learning falls in, we have a great strength in that area. We can look to develop those businesses targeting this particular application, urban and advanced air mobility. And what I want to add is one of the geographical things that we could pin it into Massachusetts is getting the operators off the ground. So whatever small firms really want to operate this service, they should be focused on operation, delivering customer service, and go elsewhere to buy the vehicles. And then connected with that, connect a software firm that works in the AI and ML. And then my first topic there is we could also establish an independent testing and verification entity to check that software and provide some greater assurance back to the industry. But that's all I have.
Well, you've certainly given us a lot to think about and to work on, which is a perfect segue for me into the next part of this panel, which is to get at what we've been sort of hinting around from the beginning, mass autonomy and the efforts that mass autonomy is going to undertake to bring all of this to fruition in Massachusetts. So I want to thank you both for setting us off on this next piece of the discussion. And with that, we have Dan Chiafalo and Richard Davey. Dan is the Director of Business Development at MassAutonomy, and he's a commercial pilot and an all-around great guy. I won't say all the things I want to say about Rich Davey, who is a former Secretary of Transportation, former General Manager of the MBTA, former CEO of the effort to bring the Olympics here to Boston, and now an important part of Boston Consulting Group. But I'm thrilled to have both of them here today. And if you don't mind, we'll leap right in with Dan and what we expect from mass autonomy.
Thank you, Paige. Let me get my screen up. Oh, of course, this would happen. Okay, there we go. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah, looking good.
Okay, great. Thanks, Paige. And thank you all for coming out to the introduction of the Massachusetts Autonomous Integration Center, commonly known as MassAutonomy. So MassAutonomy is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was created by industry and is being sponsored by the state of Massachusetts. One of our business models is to create these public-private partnerships, which will either create or enhance existing technologies to enable UASs. The ultimate goal, of course, is to help the state of Massachusetts with its traffic needs. Now, through these partnerships and the development of these technologies, that will also help drive the statewide economic development. Now, as we spoke about, we've heard multiple times during the conference today, a lot of these technologies do cross over to both surface and maritime operations. However, our focus is mostly on the air domain. So the other areas of business that MassAutonomy is going to be involved in are operations. What Jeff talked about a little bit earlier is the integration task forces. And of course, if we didn't have enough acronyms in our lexicon already, we're going to add one more, which is the ITF. We also are going to be involved in consulting and other collaborative efforts outside of the ITFs. So I think you've seen this slide multiple times. I'm just going to go over it real quickly, just to point out the green corridors. Up to the northwest is the BV-Lost corridor, and then we're working on a second corridor down by Joint Base Cape Cod. And I do also want to reiterate that the state of Massachusetts also leads in the Counter-UAS testing and evaluation. So let's get into the integrated task forces. The first one, as Jeff talked about, is going to be a roadmap for the state. So we're just going to call this the Advanced Air Mobility ITF. The overall goal of it, of course, is to get everyone better aligned and better organized in how we're going to approach the roadmap. So being better aligned refers to aligning the messages and the mission of the stakeholders. We're going to do this by coordinating and focusing the combined talents of the stakeholders into the existing project that they're working on, which will enable them to accelerate the development of the new technologies that are needed by the state of Massachusetts. So as Jeff had talked about, he was very excited about advanced air mobility and the potentials for the advancement for the state of Massachusetts. And he's actively seeking these partnerships to help share both the risks and the rewards. So the stakeholders will be able to work together and develop the technologies using our ranges for the testing evaluations, and then be able to use the state of Massachusetts to demonstrate the market viability. And of course, with the cost sharing, this enables our stakeholders to stretch out the research and development dollars or their investment dollars. So better organized. So there's short-term and long-term pieces to the roadmap. The first two are the short-term, the second two are more longer-term objectives. So when we talk about the communications piece, what we're really talking about is more than just a PR campaign or a market study. If you're familiar with the industry or you've just been in this summit for the last 2 days, you can tell immediately that there are multiple entities and organizations of various pieces all over the map, all working towards the one goal of creating the reality of advanced air mobility. So what we want to do with the ITFs and the partners that we have within them is to help define and create a unified message that these people, our stakeholders, can go out to various organizations, whether it's going out to the government agencies or going to non-market participants, universities, research and development labs, or venture capitalists. So having the unified message will really help them attain these goals and move things forward at a faster pace. So the roadmap is just what it is. It's a guideline for the state of Massachusetts to implement advanced air mobility. But it's more about trying to help the state with the how, what, where, and when to integrate these systems or adopt them. And the how part we can really break up into three pieces. So how they're actually going to do it, how much of the technology they need, and how much money to invest in it. So with the types of technologies and the amount of money to invest, let's just liken it to like buying a car. So it may have 20 options, but you may not need all 20 of them. You only need 5. So why should the state spend additional money on technologies or things that they don't need? So we're going to kind of help try to define that for them so we can get the biggest bang for our buck. Then down the road, once these technologies are developed, then we can be able to evaluate the systems or the families of systems that are being developed and see if they meet our needs. And then eventually we can also help the state with piloting the infrastructure. That was just a quick overview of who MassAutonomy is and what we're doing in our first advanced air mobility ITF. You can contact me at this number, and then I'm also going to include my contact information in the chat. So Paige, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. And now we're thrilled to have Rich Davey as part of this integration task force. MassAutonomy is already thrilled to have some partners who have signed up to be key parts of the effort. Boston Consulting Group is one of them. And Rich is going to take us through a preview of some of the work that BCG has already accomplished, particularly with respect to the communications and roadmap that Dan was just talking about. So Rich?
Yeah, thanks, Paige. Assuming everyone can hear me, thanks for having me. I found it ironic, Paige, when you're describing my my resume, that had I been responsible for anything that was airborne at the MBTA or MassDOT, I would have been in trouble. Now I find myself being able to speak to you today about a really exciting topic that we at BCG are excited about. And we've been following it from an industry perspective. I think we've worked with some of you on the phone in the past, and are excited to be investing some of our time to help shape what we think could be a really exciting opportunity for the Commonwealth and for all of you on the phone. As Paige mentioned, we've done a little work, and I wanted to just share with you today just a few perspectives and maybe some of our observations about where we think MassAutonomy and this group should go to not only be viable, but to really ensure that the last 2 days were not just a conversation, but a conversation starter to actual action. I know that's what Jeff and the Secretary in particular want. So, obviously the context is clear. Massachusetts is choosing to lead in the AAM space for a variety of potential applications, which we've talked about already. I think the vision is clear, and I think we would, BCG would suggest this as the vision to make Massachusetts the model showcase for AAM in North America by leveraging the kind of conversations and developing the private partnerships that have been discussed today to spur innovation, realize rapid economic development, and frankly, ensuring that this is not just about Boston, but about the entire state. I think that's one thing that I learned in my time as secretary, was to ensure that, to ensure success of any kind of an initiative like this, was to ensure that you were being inclusive and not just focused, as we typically do in Boston for a variety of reasons, but thinking about the other areas and assets of the state that can be deployed for such an exciting moment. We think the opportunities for use cases are pretty clear, and these aren't specifically unique to Boston and to Massachusetts, but clearly on-demand taxi services, so creating stronger economic connections within the state, potentially outside the state. We all have experienced the crush of congestion and reducing that for sure. Potential new service to Logan Airport. Before COVID, Logan was really busting at the seams. It had its highest passenger loads in its history, and as you all know, is ground constrained, bordered by a pretty congested East Boston and obviously the Boston Harbor. Retail and e-commerce delivery. I think this is a trend we've certainly seen at BCG even before COVID occurred, you saw an acceleration of e-commerce and retail. It's surged as a result of COVID. And I don't know about all of you, but personally, there's someone in my condo association here. I don't know where they store the stuff that they order, but the orders have been tremendous the last 6 months. So it's obvious, I think, from macro trend and our own experiences that e-commerce is here to stay. And then finally, opportunities for right-of-way emergency services. And so whether that's, things that we've seen in California around wildfires to the opportunities to deliver emergency services, or even looking at instances of, infrastructure criticality, for example, bridges, utilities, et cetera, that these kinds of, opportunities will exist for use cases. And look, it's tangible benefits too. I mean, Jeff, I worked for a governor as well, who often looked at me and said, okay, but what's in it for the state? What can we do? If we're going to make an investment of time, of resources, of capital, what can we bank on in return? And look, I think it's, clear that an investment here, there'll be tangible benefits to make Massachusetts a more desirable place to live. I think, Billy, you mentioned that earlier. This is a high cost, high state, but continue to attract people to the kinds of activities that AAM can provide would be incredibly interesting. Obviously, as we've talked about, making sure that this is an inclusive opportunity. So looking at the outer suburbs, thinking about warehousing, for example, in places like New Bedford and Fall River, potentially the ability to avoid major infrastructure projects going forward because we're leveraging the air. And then, as mentioned, of course, we experience it that congestion around the city in particular, and was increasing even in some other parts of the state for sure. And then just lastly, just pointing out that looking at a jobs impact opportunity, for every job that's created, 6 are indirectly created with this kind of investment. We're not behind in terms of needing to catch up, but boy, there are some folks that are doing work, and it's based largely on partnerships, right? So 3 use cases here, 3 examples that we've been following. And Los Angeles just created this urban air mobility partnership just in the last couple of weeks. So a first in the nation public-private partnership to advance air mobility, a collaboration of government and in the private sector. So opportunity to create that kind of scenario here. Vancouver in Canada has been very active, as many of you know. Again, bringing stakeholders together, investment together, and making that, as you can see in the final point, the investment case, which is over a 20-year period, expecting significant permanent job creation and incremental improvements to the GDP. And then finally, South Korea, typically and has been pretty aggressive in technology and mobility improvements in a whole bunch of areas, but urban air mobility is certainly one of them. Again, putting out bold goals to commercialize drone taxis in the next 5 years and autonomous flights in the next 15 years, and bringing a whole host of consortium together to be able to accomplish that. So as we think about what we could be in 2, 5, 10 years, these are, I think, are the best in class that are happening around partnerships in large cities and countries. We talked about this. This is an incredibly busy slide, but I think what it suggests to us is that, there's the enabling framework, which, Billy and Frank already spoke about, whether it's regulatory, management, communication needs, and infrastructure. And then the ecosystem, many of you representing that ecosystem here on the phone today, will need to be, part of the conversations to ensure that MassAutonomy, MassDOT, get this right, if you will. And so everything from, thinking about high-speed data and communications to obviously the great academic innovative centers that we have here in Massachusetts, to ensuring that we've got a regulatory scheme that not only allows for the safety of the public, but also gives innovative companies the opportunity to invest, to experiment, to be able to have live scenario planning. So I think, Jeff, you mentioned BCG happened to work with the World Economic Forum and the city of Boston a few years ago to set up an autonomous driving zone, in the Seaport district, because in part, there's only so much autonomous driving, experimentation one can do in a lab or in a warehouse or in a parking lot, right? I mean, you need real life scenarios to understand. And in fact, interesting, a story there, the one technical factor that had engineers, I think, a bit flummoxed was the amount of seagulls in the Seaport district, and believing that they were actually small children. I mean, it's a story to say, like, this is why experimentation is important. And so having a regulatory scheme and a government that's both flexible but also allows for that to occur. And you can see at the bottom, some cities again that are working in specific with members of this ecosystem. So LA working with Uber Air, and Vancouver looking at drone deliveries, Singapore creating a Volapart, and looking to have commercial flights within 5 years. Again, as we envision what we could be, why not us? And so, the path forward, I think, is where the rubber hits the road, as someone said. I think this is, to me, to the BCG, at least our observation, it requires collaboration among a bunch of stakeholders to make sure we get this right. So the private sector, federal regulators, local government, obviously, and its commitment, the academic and research, nonprofits, certainly, and certainly neighborhood groups and others. I think, Jeff teased it. It was a legacy idea we had in the Patrick administration, that the Baker administration picked up, which was a heliport in Boston, and it was challenged because, in part, stakeholders didn't understand what it meant, what it could mean for them, and so making sure that all stakeholders are engaged is going to be important. And then, as you can see here, what would be our proposed path forward or recommended path forward? Is launching that ITF, as Dan mentioned before, to build that coalition. Define, I think, again, back to what Billy was saying, the incentives, the requirements, and your barriers. I recall in 2008 and again in 2016, Governors Patrick and Baker really putting together a big life sciences initiative. And while Massachusetts was certainly a center for life sciences, it's become such a booming industry the last 10, 13 years because, the state governor, Democrat, Republican, all got behind that and enabled, continued to enable that success. And then building this roadmap as discussed, and then, thinking about opportunities for collaborative investment. I think this is a place where, again, both the private sector and government nonprofits can work together to invest in the infrastructure required to make this successful. And, in a roadmap, I think we would argue it's obviously critical to long-term success, but bringing this framework together of, putting together this partner coalition, stakeholders, we said, others, and then building foundations for success. So a business model validation. If we do make this investment, what returns can we expect? What policies need to be adopted or created? And then what kind of test zones, route placement, what are the rules of the road, if you will, or the air, as the case may be, to make this successful. So let me just conclude by saying, I think, in terms of next steps, we, at BCG would encourage this group to stay engaged, develop that initial business case and investment framework, build that consensus roadmap, begin to think about pilots. I think that's another important tactic to show policymakers, elected officials, skeptical community members that this, in fact, can have benefits and will work. Pilots usually are a good way to do that. And then, use the challenges as previously discussed to validate approach and unleash greater public investment, those kinds of opportunities. And so I think, ultimately we propose that this group continue to stay engaged over the next weeks and months, whether it be around the roadmap development, whether it be around building out these use cases, but this will be critically important to ensuring success. So Paige, I will stop there and hand it back to you. But again, BCG, we're delighted to be part of this this group, and we're committed to helping MassAutonomy, MassDOT, and others succeed. Or I should pass it back to Dan, perhaps.
You're on mute, Paige.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rich. We're grateful for your time today, but also really appreciative of the work that BCG has already done with MassAutonomy and the task force. I'm going to switch it up a little bit here, and before going into Q&A, I'm going to invite Jeff DiCarlo to join us again. I know he has some words that he'd like to say.
Jeff definitely wins the best computer background. Sure.
You know, one of the things with working with fighter pilots is you get to see lots of fighter pilot pictures, jets, armory of one
Yeah,
kind
great
and
photos.
another.
Yeah, and so I really appreciate it, Paige. And just very quickly, you know, I am so excited. And Dan, Rich, thank you. Okay, I'm like, I need a roadmap. I need specific markers. I need specific milestones. And I just want to say, as much as I can do, and hopefully with everyone's help, 1 year from today, I'm committed to having MassDOT adopt the roadmap to shape its planning and funding over the next 20 to 30 years. I'm like so excited about it. And I really want, and I'm happy to have MassAutonomy and BCG committed to getting me what I need to get there. And it's not just me, it's the Commonwealth. And I'm just super excited about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
I know we are very close to out of time, but before I let you folks go, I have one question for each of you. I'm going to try and squeeze in. Dan, you've done a tremendous job of describing for us what MassAutonomy is planning and what this AAM ITF will do. For folks who are interested in being involved, what can they expect to happen next?
Well, for those, so we'll be putting together these partnerships, talking about, well, basically just what I talked about in my briefing. What we're going to be doing is defining the goals, working with the state, and defining the exact goals of what they need to do to make all this work. Like I said, there's so many different organizations and a diverse group of companies out there. It's almost, I don't want to be flip about it, but it's almost like herding cats. So we want to kind of get the message unified and to be able to help the state say, this is where we have to go, and point them in the right direction with the right information. But
Can we expect any events in the near future, or
well, yes, we're going to have in next month or two, we're going to be rolling out we're going to have a kickoff meeting for the Advanced Air Mobility ITF. Once we nail down a date, we'll be sending out some information to everybody, emailing, and we will get the word out to everybody. So next month or two, we'll be putting that together.
Fantastic. And while we have him, I just want to shoot one question to you, Rich Davey. You've had a lot of experience, as has Jeff and others on this call, with trying to generate the kind of broad support that you need in order to get projects like the downtown heliport off the ground. Can you talk just for a moment about the role of coalition building and where you see BCGA being able to help with that?
Yeah, I mean, I could spend all day talking about coalition building, and I've been part of, as you know, some successful coalitions and some unsuccessful coalitions for that matter. But I think, a couple things, and happy to talk about BCG's role. I think first is really sort of building that, among this group and then beyond, right? So it's building support for the vision of what this can mean very positively, right? And so for some folks, it's going to be concern about their commute. It's for others, it's going to be a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. For others, it's going to be safety. And so thinking about all the things that the questions and concerns, but excitement about what this roadmap can build, I think is going to be important. I think too, I would say I've learned the hard way is that substance is as important as process, or process, I should say, is as important as substance, right? And so making sure that a broad coalition of stakeholders are built through this road mapping process so that folks feel like they've been heard as it's built is really important. And, if I wasn't clear before, I just want to state that BCG, we are, prepared to invest our time to put the roadmap together, which is why we're here. So we're excited to partner with MassAutonomy and all of you. And I hope that we will have a chance to speak to many of you in the coming, weeks as we try to begin to put a roadmap together on MassAutonomy's behalf. So that's where it starts, is making sure we're tapping the experts and the decision makers, the policy makers, and others to make sure that when Jeff, it'll be a no-brainer for Jeff or the secretary or the MassDOT board or the governor, whomever needs to sign off on the on the roadmap. It's a no-brainer because we've done our homework.
Well, thank you so much. That's the official hook that we have run over time with this panel. I could talk for a long time, but I am super thrilled to have had all of you today, and I appreciate your spending the time with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Paige and team. That was fantastic. Lots of good information. Key message here is Massachusetts is open for business, is what I heard, right? And we're looking for how to do things. I like your perspective, Rich, and especially as you've seen it before, and how do we make it happen? So I think that's excellent.